Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Korra fan commentary track video. This one's going to be for Book 2 Spirits, Episode 1, Rebel Spirit. So if you have other episodes you would like to see me do in this commentary track series for Avatar and Korra, definitely suggest more episodes below. But if you want to link up your copy of the episode to sync it up with this commentary track, have your copy of the DVD, Blu-ray, or online stream of the episode ready to go at the start of this episode, including the introduction. I'm going to stop this kind of introduction to the video in just a second, then there'll be a pause of about 10 seconds with no sound, so silence. And then when I start talking again after that pause, that's when I will press play, that's when you should press play, and we should be synced up after that. So, bringing the introduction to an end, press play when you hear me speak again after the pause. Okay, so here we are with K201 Rebel Spirit, the first episode of Book 2 Spirits. I don't rate this episode like crazily high. I think it's in around the 38 out of 52 mark, still within the top 3 tiers, of course, the really good tiers. There's episodes that are better than this. I think it's still solid as an introduction to a plot. There are weaker episodes of Book 2. The other notable thing about this episode is that it's the first episode with Studio Pierrot on animation. So Studio Mir didn't do the animation for the early sections of Book 2. They came back on board for Beginnings, and then I think the episode after Beginnings was done by Studio Pierrot, and then we were back to Studio Mir for the rest of the series, basically. As for why that happened, Studio Mir basically decided to do another project, kind of almost like ahead of Korra, and that's why there was such a massive delay in between seasons. It was done that way anyway, in that it was initially just ordered for 1 season, and the other 2 seasons were gradually announced after that. But Studio Mir did make a decision at the time, and so they were sort of in a way delayed getting back on board. And so Studio Pierrot had to sort of come in last minute to make the show happen in these earlier episodes. I do like that earlier scene there, just before we even get into the action of just something going on with the dark spirits. They're attacking people. Spirits are going to become a key aspect. But yeah, I've never had a problem with Studio Pierrot's animation. I think people make far too big of a deal about it because it was made bigger news of at the time, in that I think a lot of the same people who will heavily criticize Studio Pierrot's animation arguably don't even know that there were different animation studios on Avatar, and the animation studio differences probably stand out more in Avatar than they do here. Is it perfect? No. But I do think it's over-exaggerated as a point. it's still clearly Korra, and they get a lot of it very right considering they came on board last minute. This Bolin bit's pretty interesting in the sense of this has been his arc basically since this point of what does Bolin do? The others have found their place and what they want to do, and even in the comics right now, Bolin is still trying to find his way. Interesting, they've given him some fantastic moments along the way, but still indecisive at the moment. So that is quite interesting to consider that. This is a great action sequence though. Some really cool moments from Mako. He can ride the motorbike. Very cool firebending. Big stunt jump here. Booster with the firebending, and then, very clever here, firebend at the engine to overheat it and force the car to stop that way. That's thinking right in the middle of the air. And it also confers to us that, the police force is focusing more on the triads as we go forward. Police Officer Mako. And that's one of the results, you could say, of what happened with Amon. That he affected some sort of a change, basically. We have a non-bender president, and the police force is actually tackling the problem with benders, which is the triads. And yeah, Asami's issue is that Future Industries she's in control. They have the planes, which are a great invention. They're certainly going to work, but they have such a bad reputation because Hiroshi was an equalist, and she's confident that the planes are great and people will like them. it's just that broken reputation, basically. So presenting a little bit of an idea for everyone in this different point. 6 months have passed and this is what's going on. Korra has had 6 months of training and has become very skilled at airbending and also, using the avatar state. I think again, like a lot of this book 2 complaints that the fandom tends to have is super over exaggerated here. Like they create a plot point out of this idea of like Korra's not particularly spiritual at this point. She needs to learn how to be spiritual. But like her misuse of the avatar state here is so over exaggerated as a plot point. Like it's never brought up again really outside of this scene. And she used it safely. She turned it on for like a second, got a quick boost, and that's it. A little bit of fun, and Tenzin is being way overboard with this. But it's meant to highlight that, there's a certain value to doing things the right way. As you can see, Korra there used airbending, but that wasn't airbending style, typical airbending style. That was sort of firebending punches of air, like she used against Amon at the end of the last book. And then yet Tenzin is even more frustrated because Bumi's around more, and that sort of tends to frustrate him. But this is Tenzin before he goes through his own growth. And I think a lot of people, overly kind of negatively frame a lot of what goes on here, in that Korra is the one who is all out of line, without ever really assigning actual blame towards Tenzin and also her father Tonraq, as we'll find out. I think a lot of what Korra goes through in these early episodes of Book 2 is really understandable and relatable, and it's weird to me that so many people fail to take that into account and just see her as sort of being obnoxious and a brat, or whatever the words that they use are. They want to see Vacation Tenzin, but he tends to be more serious. And I love seeing Korra interact with the Air Kids. They're going to the Southern Water Tribe Glacier Spirits Festival. This is exciting. Not really going to the Air Temples, but we'll see that as we go on. He tends to be far too serious about that, as well as we see in Book 3 as well. But yeah, here we are on the boat back to the Southern Water Tribe. Here is Korra and Mako as a couple. And you get to see a little bit of kind of both sides of the relationship in this scene, of just, the well done awkward side of Mako's personality, of like trying to say the cool one-liners but overly planning it in a way, and they're being very punny. But I like that Korra is sort of like entertained by it and can kind of appreciate that kind of awkwardness to him. And yeah, she wishes she could be a bit more involved in the action, and she has to focus too much on training. And you can see here, like, there's definitely an element of, like, is Korra perfect in these early scenes? No. She doesn't handle some of these scenes particularly well and is perhaps too combative about things. At times difficult to communicate with. But, as we see, that was a relatively minor point. It'll get worse because of what she discovers about, her situation. So here's Kaya. Katara again, of course. And just these little teases about, like, okay, this is what Tenzin's siblings are like. Tonraq and Senna. And so, here's the meeting as boyfriend. But, no, he's cool about it. He's actually just a really nice guy, Tonraq. I wish Senna had a little bit more focus, but, she gets it in, like, the Civil War's two-parter. But here we go, the northern representatives arriving. And immediately, whoa, a lot of shade there from Tonraq about his brother. And I like that Senna is aware of just like, okay, calm down, I know you don't like him, but he's coming. And here we go. Unalaq, Eska, and Desna. And yeah, this is what starts the whole Bolin and Eska thing. And immediately showing Korra respect, noting her as the Avatar. And then, they're at odds. Tonraq, who's kind of like a leader in the south, here's the leader of the north. And then we discover that he's actually the technically the chief of both tribes, Unalaq. And again, immediately he makes these notes of like, oh, look, the south isn't very spiritual. He thinks that sort of like the South sort of modernizing has sort of helped to only really make it more sort of into itself, that it really hasn't evolved or developed into more. That the spiritual traditions of the Water Tribe, should have value. And yeah, she hasn't been told about what's going on in the world with regards to spirits. He immediately offers his assistance. And she'd like to know about that, how to deal with spirits. But they're holding her back. And a lot of it informed by, her father's issues with Unalaq, that he's keeping her away from him and a lot of the information kind of related to that stuff. It's an interesting dynamic that, again, I don't think people bring up enough. That Unalaq Tonraq is actually a really good dynamic over the course of this season. And even I suppose Unalaq Varrick actually ends up being sort of an interesting one as well, in terms of Varrick's kind of influence as a businessman in the South also is kind of meant to show that the South is going more down the modernization path and losing sight of maybe some of their traditions, of the potential to be spiritual. And yeah, Bolin is the only one to actually be honest around Varrick. And this starts off this idea of Varrick ends up liking Bolin for being relatively straight talking to him. Poor Swami. Also Ginger there in the background. And that this thing that seemed disastrous ends up being what actually gets her a good deal with Varrick. But little do we know, he's actually technically the sort of sub-villain this season, and is going to try and take advantage of this in many ways. It's actually a quite complicated plot that ends up happening here, of him trying to engineer a war between the North and the South to profit from the war. But yeah, the ostrich horse, of course. The first ever mover. First ever moving picture, and here is the idea of a mover. Funny animal stuff for the kids. Yes, the movers. I love that she wants to discuss technical business points, but he is just this instinctual businessman almost, and that he's successful. He's in this position for a reason, even though most of the scenes he comes across as this absolute madman who's making idiotic statements most of the time, but he's in this position for a reason. And it worked. But here we go. The banquet. And you could see how much that this sort of stuff means to him. That he isn't just spiritual for the sake of being spiritual. He is deeply spiritual and values that stuff very highly because he has a connection to the spirits. And it's something she struggles with, so he wants to help her. And yeah. And this is a huge reveal. I think it cannot be understated how impactful this reveal is. They told her, Aang said that she had to be trained in the compound and not travel like all the other avatars. This is a big breach of trust between Korra and her mentor, and Korra and her father. And I like that, yes, it's Unalaq kind of manipulating things a little bit here, but the important thing here is that, like, it's how little Unalaq actually has to do to get Korra's trust here, is because he's just treating her normally, treating her with a level of respect as the Avatar, and just pointing out the truth of the situation. She hasn't been informed about this. She hasn't been told about why she was trained in this way. And the way he calls them greedy for not being spiritual. Spiritual decay. I was just making this point of, like, you being spiritual has an effect, and you not being spiritual has an effect as well. I hope we can change things to improve things going forward. It presents the idea that, like, I think people almost forget about with Unalaq, that the good of what he has to say is that, yes, the world does need to be more spiritual, like, to achieve true balance. True balance isn't just balance between humans, it's balance between humans and spirits. And how can that even be achieved until the spirits are back in the human world and more humans are able to go to the spirit world, which is the big point about opening the spirit portals. Obviously it's to free Vaatu, but deep down you do get the sense that Unalaq wants spirits back in the world in the first place. And so the positive is just, seeing that this is a time to potentially, go for that idea. We can maybe bridge that gap now. It's been enough time since Juan sealed them away. Now we can maybe actually approach that relationship. And yeah, Eska's very possessive approach to this relationship with Bolin. I love the design of all these kind of toys and kind of a fairground like attractions. Momo. And again, this was a point back in book 1, and it ends up being a point, like, in a way in this season and the next season, of, like, Tenzin is a good teacher in some ways, but not in others, and he kind of struggles to adapt in a way to a degree to sometimes the people he's training. And it's an interesting one of, like, Mako trying to find the right balance of, like, should he do this or should he do that, and I suppose in a way, like, Korra even not being sure what she wants. Because that's the point. Like, she points this out in book 4 at the end of, like, that only right at the end does she finally feel sort of comfortable with the idea of, like, I finally feel comfortable just knowing what it is that I need to do as the Avatar. I'm not just reacting to what's happening, and that's the thing to accomplish. She finally at the end knows what to do, and up until that, she does struggle with the exact approach. She's still kind of in training, kind of needed to help in the world, but the people who are around her, kind of her handlers, aren't really allowing her to play a role in the world, and that's what Unalaq is sort of offering her: more respect, a chance to actually jump more heavily into that role. But yeah, this dark spirit, it highlights, how powerful dark spirits actually are. That some very powerful benders here are, taking the advantage here. It's also the idea of, like, this is the first time, like, Korra's fought a spirit, and you have to deal with this kind of unique physiology that they have. Tonraq, I love his unique style. It's very sort of, blunt in a way. He goes straight for the big attacks. Lots of ice involved. It's a unique style for him, which I think stands out quite well. And again, the action was pretty good. Like, in terms of animation. Tenzin tries to be that kind of spiritual bridge, but can't make any impact whatsoever. And this is Korra, like, her first time dealing really with a spirit. And who is the person to stop this? Someone who actually knows about spirits. And in this conflict, this is what she needs to know about. She's not going to learn about the spirits from Tonraq, who seems borderline anti-spirit, as we'll sort of find out over the coming episodes. And then Tenzin, who acts like he knows a lot about spirits, but deep down doesn't, which is the plot point later on with the idea of who is going to be Korra's spiritual guide, Tenzin or Jinora. It's Jinora. That this is just something Tenzin isn't good at. And this is great here. I love this scene. The music, the kind of peaceful nature of this technique, spirit bending. That he kind of puts it into a trance and kind of calms it down. The darkness, you can see it's almost gone already, but it's still dark to a degree. The light comes on, and this is a waterbending technique, but with spirituality included so much. And I love the line. Go in peace. It's an epic scene of like a different technique. It wasn't a combat focused technique, but it was a technique that is showing like respect to the spirits, purifying them. Yeah, he knows this. He trained in this by showing respect towards the spirits and putting value into that side of things. And like it comes from a place of like caring about Korra here, Tenzin and Tonraq. But they can't see how they've hurt, I suppose, Korra with the lies. And not letting her speak for herself. I was like, please listen, like that was a bad time to jump in there, Tenzin. And Korra is more of an avatar of action. So, of course, she sides with the person who has a technique that can actually do that to spirits. And it's a little dramatic, perhaps, to sort of have the breakup of student and mentor here, but it was a serious breach of trust that after all this time training together, he still didn't tell her about what happened. And he still, has that approach with teaching. And, in a way, like, Korra learns the value of what Tenzin does bring to her by being away. And similarly, Tenzin is able to grow while being away from Korra. In the same way that sort of Tonraq grows a little bit by kind of Korra being off on her own, learning from Unalaq, and sees that, as the Avatar, she can affect a change in the world via spirituality. But yeah, just a little bit of kind of opening the door there of like, okay, fine, brother, sister, you can come along too. That's a nice little airbending moment as they go off. And I think Mako finally says the kind of right thing here. And that's the thing, like, she isn't just making this, like, decision out of just wanting to be a brat or wanting to be a nuisance or anything like that. This is what she believes will help her, getting training from someone who can truly help her. And at least as of the first episode, yes, there are teases of the idea that like Unalaq is up to no good in terms of like the way he worded some of his sort of criticism of the South and the way they are. But it's also very easy just after like the first episode, even the first two episodes, to just view him as just, okay, he cares about spirituality, and it honestly upsets and frustrates him that other people aren't as spiritual and put no effort in to be spiritual when this is an important part of the world. And now there's attacks happening all over the place that are being sort of caused in a way by that like lack of balance spiritually in the human world. So, you know, he's making that sort of point, and I like that that's here. And I think that's what's important about this section of the story prior to Unalaq being sort of like outed as the villain, of the lengths that he's willing to go through to get the South more spiritual. That sort of once he realizes he isn't going to just by giving a speech make a big change in the South to become more spiritual, that they honestly do care more about what Varric is up to next, and that sort of stuff. These festivals where it's all about, you know, these games and so on, they don't really care about the spiritual aspect of the festival, because it's that's what it is, like the Glacier Spirits Festival. But there's no element of that in here. That while you're meant to be sort of negative to Unalaq's viewpoint in this, he's correct in the idea of that, like, this is what this festival is about, but nothing really is about spirits in this festival. Outside of, like, it's a day to sort of celebrate and have fun, it's not really about any of the other stuff. And that has been forgotten in, I suppose, the South's destruction in a way during the war, and how the rebuilding has gone because of the modernization of the world in that time period. And I actually think that's quite an interesting point, and you immediately see the contrast between a lot of sort of more modern characters who aren't spiritual and then someone who is. Like, just the introduction of a new technique like spirit bending, of like a way to pacify spirits who go out of control. And like, if Unalaq was around during ATLA, that would have been a way to calm Heibai down and stuff like that. I think it is such a cool technique. It's a great introduction to the idea of, a spiritual master we have here. And he's not going to be constantly speaking in pearls of wisdom like a Hugh, a Guru Patik, or an Iroh, but more represent just a normal character who is spiritual and has, you know, the potential to be a good teacher, but he's not exactly going to be your Iroh-like character. But he's got elements of that, and I think that's why I think, you know, Unalaq has more nuance than I think people give him. Is he the kind of charismatic powerhouse of an Amon with his leadership, or Zahir with his sort of willingness to just sort of go for it with a lot of the violent points that the Red Lotus make, or, you know, again, how in control Kuvira is as a leader? No. But some of the points that he makes, the fact that, like, immediately he's introduced and boom, you have all these dynamics. Tonraq doesn't like him. Unalaq doesn't like Tonraq because they're complete opposites. Complete opposites. Just look at their designs. Tonraq is this hugely sort of muscular character who has a very physical style of waterbending, versus Unalaq, who's a thinner character who has a more fluid style that's spiritual, and he wins a fight in the end that so many powerful benders couldn't win by using a non-combat technique. That's a amazing kind of contrast straight away. And that's where I kind of feel like a lot of the criticism in a way comes from it. Like, it's just like, is it just because he's not this kind of bombastic character that's why he doesn't stand out? But I think it makes him kind of more interesting that he is a villain who is just part of the family, and what he goes to do and the reveals that he is Red Lotus, I think actually does make him quite interesting as a character. But yeah, like, I think you see a lot of pretty solid elements to start this season off. Like, there's teases of like friction between Mako and Korra, but I don't think it necessarily speaks to this idea of like there's just an inherent communication issue or anything like that. Especially with the way they sort of kind of resolve the things in this episode of like Mako kind of being like, you know, given what's going on, I honestly can't give you much advice because it's Avatar stuff, but I do trust that you always will try to make the right decision, and that's what she needed, someone to show faith in her, which Unalaq is, the others aren't. And it's a setup for a lot that happens in this book. Korra learning a lot kind of on her own, away from her mentors, and then coming back to them and learning from them in a different way. Tenzin has that arc, Tonraq has that arc to a degree. That's why the Civil War two-parter is so good, about kind of the fracturing of Korra's relationship with her father, but how it comes back together, and so on. And I think that's the strength of these earlier episodes. Like I've said before many times, the weakness in book 2 to me is episode 5 and 6. It's not 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it's certainly not the back half of the season. It's 5 and 6, which is where it sort of goes a little bit off the rails. But I suppose we'll get to them in future commentaries. So that has been the video. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this episode. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.